My name is Rogier Verhulst. I'm one of the co-authors of The Business of Marketing Research. And today I want to give you a quick intro into Chapter 9, Customer Satisfaction. It's a very broad topic, but we try to distill it down into the essence of what you need to know to develop and design effective customer satisfaction research. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll walk you through some of the main things that we're covering in the book. Like I said, my name is Rogier Verhulst. We're talking today about Chapter 9, which is all about customer satisfaction. Now, customer satisfaction is a broad topic, but roughly speaking, it covers sort of 5 big topics. Like one is, we'll talk a little bit about like why satisfaction is such a top priority for many companies. Oftentimes, the biggest line item in terms of spend for a market research group, and it's really big business. The market is really growing, and we'll talk a little bit about why it's such a priority. We'll talk about like the measurement itself, like what are you measuring when you talk about customer satisfaction? And we'll talk about how to design the research effectively and what are the factors you have to take into account. And then we'll talk about the ways in which you can analyze customer satisfaction data for the most impact. And what are the types of analysis you can do to highlight the improvement areas and the areas that companies can address to continue to increase customer satisfaction. And then lastly, we'll talk about how organizations embed customer satisfaction into decision making. Customer satisfaction has grown beyond the walls of market research, and in many organizations, it's many different functions are involved with customer satisfaction or customer relationship or customer loyalty. So we'll talk about why customer satisfaction is a priority. Now, there are really 2 overarching reasons why a lot of companies are spending so much time trying to understand and measure customer satisfaction and track that over time. And the main reason is that it is a competitive advantage. I think a lot of companies are understanding that if you are customer-centric, you have to manage and measure kind of where you are with your customers, where do you stand with your customers, and how strongly are you delivering on your product promise. And so customer satisfaction measurement is really playing that role. And it's a competitive and differentiating factor for many companies out there that makes them stand out from their peers. And research has shown that customers who are really focused on this area grow much faster than their peers. The second reason is why it's such a big priority for many companies is because our lives increasingly are playing and unfolding on the internet in a digital way. But it also means that, consumers are increasingly reviewing and rating different providers, whether it's on Amazon or Yelp. And that shifts a lot of power to the consumer. And consumers can essentially make or break the reputation of a company almost overnight. And that's why companies are really focused on understanding how the products are being perceived and how well they're delivering on the promise that the product has. And so that's why customer satisfaction is such a priority for many companies. Now, what are we actually measuring, when we talk about customer satisfaction? In the book, we talk about this in different ways, there's different ways you can look at this. But it all boils down to looking at sort of a product adoption funnel or a consideration funnel or the customer journey that people go on when they buy and consume products. And it usually starts something that looks like, they build an awareness, they have an awareness of their need. They evaluate the different ways in which they can address that particular need. And then boil it down to the set of companies that can deliver on that particular need. And ultimately, people will then purchase the one that they feel is going to deliver the best on their expectations. They consume it, and if the consumption was a very pleasant experience, that experience was pleasant, then it drives satisfaction. And ultimately, the satisfaction will lead to, if it is a very satisfactory experience, it will lead to retention and loyalty. And so what is underlying this is this notion that there is a particular expectation that customers have that's building up through that process of evaluation and awareness and consideration. And then there's the actual delivery of the product or delivery of the service and this experience. Now, in customer satisfaction, what you're trying to do is understand the gap between the expectations that people are having, consumers are having experience. You measure both expectation and experience. So that's one way of doing satisfaction research. However, most of the time, and we talk about this in chapter at length, is like you either use kind of an absolute measurement of the experience itself, or you try to measure the satisfaction of the experience relative to a set of competitors. So how does that experience with product A compare to products that people have experienced with, or that people, the satisfaction or how they have experienced other products, and try to understand the relative performance of your product versus a set of competitors. Now, where do we measure customer satisfaction? Customer satisfaction is measured along a continuum. Essentially, you want to measure customer satisfaction throughout the buying process, throughout all the experience that people have, not just with the physical product, but everything around it, the support they have experienced, the experience of the salesperson, and it can get quite involved and quite complex in some cases, particularly in a B2B space. Now, LinkedIn's platform, we have obviously a number of services you can enjoy from LinkedIn. You can try and get a job, you can build relationships, you can stay informed, you can stay connected with your peers. And so there's a set of like underlying features that are delivering against that particular experience. And so with customer satisfaction research, you try to understand how each of those touch points are laddering up to the overall value that we're trying to deliver, whether it's getting the right job or building meaningful relationships, and ultimately linked to the overall satisfaction or NPS. And so typically you want to measure satisfaction. It's not just one single survey, but it could be a number of surveys because a number of touch points that will get you the most complete picture. So we'll talk in the book about like how do you design a system, if you will, rather than an individual survey. Now, it's also really important that you pick the right metric. Within the customer satisfaction space, there's a lot of like options you have, and there's a lot of research and science that's come out over years in terms of how you do this. Do you just ask straight up how satisfied you are on a 5-point scale from very dissatisfied to very satisfied, or do you ask a recommend question, or how likely to recommend this product to a friend or colleague? And the thinking is that for the things that I'm recommending or I'm highly likely to recommend, obviously those are the things that I'm very satisfied with. But I'm actually taking a step further. I'm actually wanting to vouch for it and put my reputation in line because I feel so good about the product. Or how likely to repurchase the product, or how likely to switch. And so the metric you pick, and we'll talk about this in the book at length, it really depends on how strongly it correlates with particular business outcomes. And so some metrics may work out well, other metrics may not be as strongly correlating with some of the business outcomes that ultimately matter, whether it's revenue or profit. So how do you design the research? Ultimately, you want to make sure that you have a very strong stakeholder, an executive sponsor behind the research that's aligned to the research program that you're designing, but ultimately is also your spokesperson and your champion. Make sure that you're not just doing the research, but that the research is also getting acted on. The second thing you want to do is obviously select a metric and a measurement approach. Like, what kind of mechanism do you use? Do you do it with email based, with in product? Do you do it intercept? Who are you surveying? Are you surveying all customers? Are you surveying only the recent customers who've had a meaningful relationship? And so there's a number of like underlying things you have to make. Do you measure your satisfaction in a competitive context, or do you measure it through as a standalone? And also you have to decide on like what are the drill down questions to choose, because ultimately it's not just about that one question, whether it's overall satisfaction or recommend. You want to understand kind of what the underlying drivers are, like why are people satisfied? And oftentimes these questions are even more important than the overall metric. And then you need to decide whether you execute the survey blindly or non-blindly, and each have pros and cons. So we'll talk in this chapter about all these different factors you have to consider and what are the pros and cons are of each. We'll also spend a great deal of time talking about how you can analyze the data effectively. One of the ways that you can look at the data is what's called through a key driver analysis. So we'll talk about not just about like the outcome and the descriptive metrics, but also like how can you actually model, how can you determine like what are the levers that an organization has to drive up satisfaction. The underlying levers are ultimately the quality of the product, the experience of the sales professional, and many, many other aspects as well. In this case, we're looking at logistic regression model, looking at how you can drive a net promoter score, which is the proportion of promoters minus the proportion of detractors, and ultimately building models that either drive the promoters or driving down detractors. This is really where the most meaningful insights will come from for the organization to act on and decide what it should be focusing on to drive up their satisfaction scores or NPS scores. Another useful way of analyzing the data, and we'll talk at great length about this book, is looking at the performance versus importance map. So how do you determine the performance of underlying drivers of satisfaction against an axis which shows the importance? So how strongly are they drivers of satisfaction? Like how important are they in constituting the overall experience? And so plotting those on a 2x2 will help you understand where do you need to focus as an organization. So we'll talk about how you develop those types of maps for greater impact. Now, lastly, we'll talk about how satisfaction is sort of growing beyond the walls of market research. And in many organizations, there are many functions involved. And it's not just about the measurement anymore, but it's about customer satisfaction has moved to almost like a product and a relationship management tool, if you will, but in and of itself, where the fact of engaging your customers through surveys opens up opportunities to engage them and have a dialogue and close more business. And so we'll talk a little bit more about like how that space is evolving, and what are things you need to consider to set up a program that will deliver the most impact for your organization. So these are the 5 covers we covered today. I want to thank you for your time, for listening. I hope you're inspired to pick up our book, The Business of Marketing Research, and hopefully you have a sense of what we're covering in Chapter 9. Thank you for your time. Take care. Bye.